India and Pakistan. So Modi gave Indian military free hand to act. Um, what does that mean? And then Pakistan also claimed it has credible intelligence that India will strike within 36 hours. That was like a day ago. Pakistan
Yeah.
reported said that. Um, what's your take on that? Are they just the rhetoric or
Well, well, you anticipated what I was going to say. I hope that is just rhetoric,
okay?
because to say to tell your military in a confrontation with a another power, which is a nuclear power,
Mhm.
that they have a free hand to do whatever they like. I think that is incredibly reckless. I mean, this absolutely requires political leadership, and what ought to happen is that Modi ought to be in contact with his opposite numbers in Islamabad. He ought to be calling the Prime Minister and President of Pakistan. There ought to be even a meeting between them, actually, to see whether this whole situation can be brought under control. But we are still, I think, very much at the stage of rhetoric. And the danger is that the rhetoric might get out of control
Mhm.
with terrible consequences, which I hope we won't see.
But they both are under a lot of pressure from their own country, right? That's the hard part I find that lots of times is even though maybe none of them really want to
No question.
get into a real hot war, but they both are under a lot of a tremendous amount of pressure, right?
I'm afraid that is absolutely correct. I mean, we've I've done some programs on the Duran on my own channel um, about this, and I tried to be as factual and as even-handed as I could. The anger that was directed at me from people on each side, each blaming me with siding with the other, is just was just extraordinary.
Now, I heard that there was some fight even break out between India and Pakistan in Britain. You know, the people who are living
Oh
there, they're
yeah.
fight. Okay. So, okay.
I'm afraid that's absolutely true. I mean, we have a big Indian community, and we
Uh-huh.
have a very, very much bigger Pakistani community,
Okay.
and they are distinct from each other, unfortunately. And they tend to support different politics, and
Mhm.
they're not friendly with each other, and these things do blow up.
Okay. BRICS foreign minister, they had a meeting in Brazil, but they failed to issue a joint statement. It seems there is a disagreement over the language related to reform the UN Security Council. So apparently,
Yeah.
Brazil, India, and South Africa, I guess they have a long time ambition to join, I guess, the Security Council. But to put it into the joint statement, Egypt and Ethiopia, I think they are much against that. To put it, they don't think it BRIC
Oh.
is a good place to just to push something like that. What's your take on that?
I agree with I agree with Egypt and Ethiopia. I mean, this is not. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, BRICS, what it needs to focus on is trade and
Mhm.
developing the trade system that it's all about at the moment. That is the priority. Security Council reform can wait, and the reason I say that is because there cannot be Security Council reform anyway unless the Western powers basically ease their opposition to it. The Western powers are utterly opposed to Security Council reform because they have a entrenched superiority on the Security Council, which is a leftover from the Second World War. I mean, it's absurd that Britain and France are both permanent members of the Security Council, and a country like India or a
Mhm.
country like Brazil is not. I have a lot of sympathy for their position, but um, getting into debates about this issue until this issue of the West it changes is a waste of time and energy. And the country that India, Brazil, and South Africa should be talking to is first and foremost the United States. India, one time, by the way, was treated in a most humiliating way because I remember this is during Obama's time. Their representative it was India's turn to have um, its ambassador on the Security Council as a non-permanent member. And Obama was saying, no, we're going to keep an eye on what you do and how you vote. And we treat this as a lesson to see whether you are qualified for Security Council membership. This is the United States. I mean, treating India, a country, of millennial civilization, as, a pupil that must, tick off the exam questions set by the teacher. It's absolutely preposterous. But that is where the problem lies.
We talked about this before. I think both France and Britain, they are not going to give up their seats there. Absolutely not.
No.
In the meantime, I also think that, for example, part of the reason Egypt and Ethiopia object to it is South Africa, I guess, assumed that they should be join the UN Security Council to represent Africa. I'm not sure Egypt and Ethiopia agrees to that South Africa should be the country to represent Africa. The same with Brazil. Now, Brazil assumed that it's the largest country in South America, so Brazil should be the representative. But Brazil is the only country that speaks Portuguese. Rest of the South America, they speak Spanish. Okay. I'm not sure other countries would agree, just Brazil, you can represent us. I think it's probably more complicated than just the Western power won't give up their seats. For that reason, we talked about this, it's probably best to keep it as it is. Don't you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, if there is a consensus on Security Council reform, then we can move forward with it. And then we can start to look at all of these various issues. There is no such consensus at the moment. It's not just that the British and the French will never give up their rights to be permanent members. They do not want additional members at all. Because if they are additional members, then Britain and France's position in the world will become diluted, and they will no longer be considered important countries any longer. And as far as the West is concerned, the West will lose its inbuilt majority on the Security Council. The way the Security Council works is that you have 3 permanent members who are, of course, Western. You have elections to appoint other representatives from other regions. Europe is one. So you always get, in fact, I think you get 2 more European states. So from 3, it immediately becomes 5. And then you're able to manipulate votes in all sorts of other places. And you're able eventually to get almost always a pro-Western majority on the Security Council. It may not reflect the setup in the General Assembly, but that is how the Security Council works. If you start introducing new members like India, Brazil, South Africa, or others, then they will not have that inbuilt majority any longer. So this is where the opposition from the West comes. Now, as to what you might do, I've seen all kinds of suggestions made. I mean, Brazil and India are very big countries. On that strength alone, maybe they should be Security Council members. But you could have organizations like the African Union and ASEAN and the Arab League, maybe, and the Organization of American States or whatever. Maybe they should have members. But, these are not issues to discuss now. You have to, first of all, agree to reform the Security Council, and we are nowhere close to that point. Having these discussions now is a complete waste of time. All that it does, as you rightly say, is it creates divisions and disagreements over something that is purely hypothetical.
I agree, yeah. Anyway, it's a little bit surprising because it's the meeting is in Brazil. You would think they would want to see a successful meeting, right? So fail to have a joint statement is not very successful. And yet Brazil is the one who apparently sent an even letter to Egypt about this. And Egypt said, no, we're not going along with that kind of language, something like that. It's a little bit surprising, I think.
No, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I think this is very much the character of President Lula,
Okay.
who has a very, very high opinion of himself. I mean, I'm not, hostile to him. I think he's done many fine things, and I think he's been
Mhm.
perhaps the most successful uh, president of Brazil that, well, at least I can remember. But I mean, he does have faults, shall we say, as a
Uh-huh.
diplomat.
But Wang Yi and Lavrov, they had a meeting. I thought that meeting went pretty well. What do you think?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, quite apart from anything else, not only do the Russians and the Chinese have this very strong strategic partnership now, but I mean, it's absolutely clear that the two men consider each other friends.
Hmm.
I mean, so there is this um, personal chemistry between them that means that they're able to work well together,
Hmm.
which, even between friendly countries doesn't always happen. You may have two countries which are very friendly to each other, but their foreign ministers might not have that kind of chemistry. But clearly, Lavrov and Wang Yi do. I mean, they really clearly like and respect each other a great deal. I personally believe, and this is my own view, that the Chinese Russian strategic partnership is going to move on and move forward. Again, I was had a very difficult conversation with some British person. He says, "Well, don't you understand that all that's happening is that China is taking over Russia and Russia is becoming part of Greater China?" And the point I always say to these people is, first of all, that isn't true anyway. But
Hmm.
if that is what is happening, if that really were what were is happening, well, the Chinese are doing it in a way that is extremely clever and doesn't hurt um, Russian self-respect and dignity. Whereas what you really want to do is to take over Russia, and
Yeah, yeah.
the people who are really trying to make Russia into a vassal state and a satellite are yourselves.
Hmm. Yeah, the Europeans, yeah, they would love to.
By the way, Russians, exactly. The Russians say this both about China and the West all the time. I
Mhm.
mean, they understand this very, very well. Remember, they had to deal with the Americans.
Yeah, the Europeans would love to first to divide
Yeah,
Russia, right, into, I think they even had a map, like a 6 states or something,
yeah,
and then gradually control. I
that's right.
guess the purpose to divide that is to conquer, right? So you can conquer one
Absolutely.
after another, I guess. That's the plan.
Exactly. Exactly. Exactly.
Um, so they are I'm sure one of the things they talk about is this May 9th Victory Day celebration for the 80 years
Mm.
anniversary. What is interesting to me is that they invite many countries. One is Israel. I would think Israel should be interested in coming, but Netanyahu already said he's not
Yeah.
coming. Uh, I
Yeah.
always find I mean, why? What's the problem for, of all the countries, I really think Israel should come. Wouldn't you think? And yet he's not coming.
Oh, absolutely. Well, indeed, though he has, of course, attended the celebrations before,
Mhm.
so he's not coming this time. Though he did attend on earlier years, but anyway, I mean, we all know why. I mean, he realizes if he goes, the Europeans will criticize him, and he's angry with the Russians because they've been criticizing what he's been doing in Gaza and all of that sort of thing. But you're absolutely correct. I mean, given what is being commemorated,
Yeah.
which was a victory in which Russia made, sorry, Donald Trump, far and away the biggest contribution, if you're talking about Germany,
Mhm.
and that it was through that victory that the Jewish people were saved because
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
were. I mean,
Yeah.
at least in, yeah, it is quite wrong for the Prime Minister of Israel, of all countries,
Mhm.
not to attend such a celebration at this time. But there it is.